In the late 1980s, there was a British-Australian serial killer. Over a 14-month period, he murdered 6 elderly women, using his fists, hammer, and pantyhose as tools. A few years after being sentenced to prison, he hanged himself. Before he died, he gave a picture with 2 trees and the Arabic numeral 9 drawn on it to the last person who visited him. So there has been speculation that he actually killed 9 people, not 6. March 1st, 1989 at 3:40 p.m., a block of flats on the outskirts of Mosman. Most of the residents in this block of flats were elderly women, with a few young families and children. At that time, 2 young boys exiting the lift on the first floor were confronted with a shocking sight. An 82-year-old woman, Gwendolyn Mitchell-Hill, was bleeding profusely from her head, attempting to crawl to the glass door at the front of the apartment. Her socks were off, her walking stick and handbag lay on the ground. Then boys sought help from a neighbor, and Gwendolyn was rushed to the emergency room by ambulance. Initially, many assumed she had fallen and injured her head, failing to notice her handbag had been rummaged through, and the blood on the ground was simply washed away. While doctors took medical action to prevent an intracranial hematoma in Gwendolyn, further examination revealed bruising around her eye sockets and several broken ribs, injuries inconsistent with a fall. Consequently, a doctor contacted the police. Another medical staff member also reported the state of Gwendolina's handbag to the police. That night, Gwendolyn passed away due to the severity of her injuries. The police dispatched forensic evidence teams and investigators to look into the case. They discovered that the wallet which had been in the deceased's handbag was missing. The following day, the post-mortem report revealed that Gwendolyn had suffered severe bruising around her right eye and 7 broken ribs, injuries consistent with being beaten, as well as severe bruising on her right shoulder and wounds to both sides of her skull consistent with being struck with a blunt instrument. The police initially concluded that she had been the victim of a malicious attack. On May 9, 1989, Winfreda Ashton, an 84-year-old, had a busy day. She visited Sydney Eye Hospital and then went to Mosman's Veterans Club. Around 2:30 p.m., after leaving the club, she went to a bank and a supermarket, chatting with a friend along the way. Before returning home, she checked her mailbox. In the evening, she was found lying face down beside a trash bin by a resident, her shoes and walking stick scattered on the ground. Like the previous victim, her handbag had been rummaged through, and her wallet was missing. The autopsy revealed widespread bruising on her head from blows, 5 broken ribs on her left side, and bruises behind her ear indicating she had been forcibly held down. She had been strangled with her own pantyhose with such force that it cut through her skin. Her legs were crossed and her arms lay by her sides. No signs of seminal fluid were found. The police concluded they were dealing with a serial killer. Both victims were wealthy elderly women from the same suburb. Their injuries were strikingly similar, involving extensive trauma from blunt objects and fists. The crime scenes were near their homes, only about a kilometer apart, and located at the entrances of their residences. Moreover, while the victim's wallet was stolen, her diamond rings remained, implying the motive was violence, not financial gain. In the following months, though no more murders occurred, several women reported assaults to the police. On June 6th, Marjorie Mosley, a 77-year-old, reported to hospital staff and police that a man had put his hand down her nightie, but she couldn't recall the man's appearance. On June 24th, an old woman reported that a man had fondled her clothes and buttocks. In the next room, another patient's nightgown was lifted and her breasts were fondled. On July 9th, a lady found Ashton's lost wallet in Aspen Park. Unaware of its importance as evidence, she put it in Ashton's mailbox. On October 18th, Doris Cox, an 86-year-old with a bloody face, was found sitting at her door. Her face was covered with grass, several teeth were knocked out, and she had head injuries. The next day, before the police were notified, neighbors, thinking she had fallen, cleaned the scene. The forensic examiner of the first 2 victims checked Doris and confirmed her injuries were from a rear assault. Though she survived due to her dementia, the police could get no more clues. On Thursday, November 2nd, 85-year-old Margaret Pahood was attacked on her way home from shopping. A girl found her injured, with messy clothes, shoes, and a walking stick scattered around. She was lying face down in a pool of blood. Before the police arrived, the blood at the scene was washed away. The autopsy showed similarities to previous murders, a fractured skull from a blunt blow to the back of the head, and tears to the face and head. There was no sign of sexual assault, and her handbag was missing. On November 3rd, 81-year-old Olive Cleveland was attacked on her way back to the nursing home and found dead on the road. The killer left his unique mark. Her clothes were lifted, legs exposed, pantyhose removed and tightly around her throat. Like other victims, her head was surrounded by blood. Her belongings, including a handbag, shoes, and glasses, were by her feet. To protect otherly residents, staff washed away the blood before the police arrived. The police found more clues about the killer. He always struck around 3 p.m. with no witnesses. Although Olive's crime scene was farther from others, it was still relatively close. With 4 murders committed, the state government offered $200,000 reward for the killer's arrest. On November 23rd, Muriel Falconer, a 93-year-old, was still mentally alert. After receiving her lunch from a delivery worker, she visited nearby shops. The next day, the delivery worker returned around 1 p.m., but Falconer didn't answer. A neighbor, worried after not seeing her all day, went to check and used a spare key to enter. The neighbor found Falconer lying face down in the hallway, her clothes disarranged and skirt pulled above her head, which couldn't fully conceal the blood flowing from her head. Her shoes and shopping items were by her feet, and her wallet was open with money missing. The autopsy revealed severe beatings, 3 skull fractures, several facial bone fragments, and her pantyhose and belt tightly around her throat. Unlike the previous 4 murder scenes, which were compromised, this crime scene was intact. The killer left footprints in Falconer's blood, providing police with valuable evidence for identifying suspects. In addition, the special task force handling the murder investigation shifted its focus. Noticing that all victims were elderly women, they realized the killer might have attacked many others. So they asked local police stations for records of recent assaults on elderly women. Several cases were transferred, and the victims gave similar descriptions of the attacker, a white male, around 50 years old, with gray hair. On January 11th, Daisy Roberts, an elderly patient, was assaulted in the hospital. She reported that a man with gray hair entered her room, put his hands under her nightgown, and fondled her breasts, claiming she was suffering from hypothermia. Daisy was terrified and called for help. A nurse arrived and saw a middle-aged man rushing out of the room. Fortunately, the nurse recognized him as John Wayne Glover, a sales representative for a food company. The police located Glover and summoned him to the police station on January 13th for questioning, but he didn't show up. When the police called his house, his wife answered and informed them that Glover had attempted suicide and was currently at Royal North Shore Hospital. 2 police officers went to the hospital to see Glover. Although he refused to be interviewed, he allowed them to take photos. Moreover, hospital staff handed over a suicide note he had written, which included the phrases, "No more grannies," and "Essie started it." 2 weeks later, the suicide note and photos were given to the Special Task Force for the murder investigation. Although there was a lack of evidence, they were convinced that Glover was the killer. The head of the task force said, "Even if he says, 'I don't want to talk,' we can't prove anything." However, the photo matches the description of the suspect, and given his job as a food salesman, he could have been near any of the murder scenes. Due to insufficient evidence, the police didn't charge Glover but kept him under surveillance, even installing a tracking device on his car. On March 19, 1990, at 10:30 a.m., Glover parked his car in front of a house. After tidying his hair and tie and grabbing his briefcase, he entered the house. Initially, police and investigators, thinking he was meeting lawyers, waited outside. But when he hadn't left by 5 p.m., they obtained a warrant to enter at 6 p.m. 2 uniformed officers knocked on the door, got no response, and went to the back of the house. Through a glass window, they spotted a hammer on a blood-stained carpet and immediately forced their way in. They found Joan Sinclair's body, a 60-year-old woman, lying near a bloodied crowbar. Her head was wrapped in a towel, her lower clothing removed, and her pantyhose tightly tied around her neck. Proceeding cautiously, as Glover was still inside, the police reached the bathroom to find Glover unconscious, part of his face submerged in water. Medical personnel arrived, pronounced Sinclair dead at the scene, and treated Glover for alcohol and drug overdose before taking him to a police-guarded hospital. Later, Glover admitted to the police that he had murdered Sinclair. He stated they had a prior relationship, and he used a hammer to strike her head, removed her pantyhose to strangle her, then moved her body onto a mat. He wrapped 4 towels around her severe head wound to stem the bleeding and dragged her body across the room, leaving a blood trail. Finally, he took a bath, swallowed a handful of sleeping pills, and slashed his left wrist in a suicide attempt while lying in the bathtub. Born into a working-class family in England on November 26, 1932, his childhood experiences are unknown. It is well known that the British society at that time was experiencing an economic crisis. As a result, workers had low and unstable incomes and could only live in cramped and dilapidated houses, and conflicts and contradictions among family members were also prone to arise due to the pressure of life. On top of that, his mother, Frida, had an extremely complicated emotional life. She divorced Glover's father and then married 3 times, and she had numerous boyfriends. Such a complicated emotional relationship left Glover confused and upset. Around 1956, Glover migrated to Australia, adrift and uncertain of his future. He drifted across various states, a pattern mirrored by many serial offenders. His criminal activities soon followed. In Victoria, he was guilty of 2 thefts. In New South Wales, another theft was added to his record. Years later in Melbourne, he was convicted of 2 counts of assaulting women, 2 indecent acts, 1 assault with intent to wound, and 4 more thefts. After serving 3 years in prison, Glover sought stability. He secured a job as a food company sales representative and married a woman, with whom he had 2 children. The family settled in Mosman, Sydney, residing with his wife's parents. His wife's mother, Essie, was a dominant figure, prone to criticizing and interfering in others' lives. In reality, Glover was a volunteer at an elderly association. His friends saw him as friendly and trustworthy. No one suspected he was a serial killer targeting elderly women. On March 28th, the trial of Glover commenced. Glover entered a plea of not guilty on the grounds of diminished responsibility. A psychiatrist testified that Glover had harbored hostility and aggression toward his mother since childhood, feelings that later extended to Essie. The psychiatrist speculated that the phrase "Essie started it" in Glover's suicide note might indicate that his killing spree was triggered by Essie. Another psychiatrist confirmed that Glover suffered from a severe personality disorder, likely rooted in his relationships with his mother and Essie. The prosecutor argued that Glover was fully aware of his actions and meticulously planned the disposal of stolen goods and the destruction of forensic evidence by cleaning his hammer with acid. His sexual impotence and lack of sexual interest led him to commit acts of indecency rather than sexual assault. The use of stockings to strangle his victims served both to confirm their deaths and to mislead the police into believing the motive was sexual. Additionally, his gambling addiction and the financial gains from theft were highlighted as key factors in his crimes. After the jury's guilty verdict, the judge stated that he was dealing with an extremely dangerous prisoner who could choose when to attack and when to stop. He was cunning and able to cover his tracks. It was clear that Glover had carefully selected his opportunities, and although the crimes were opportunistic, he had avoided high-risk places. Since January 1989, this period had been one of serious crimes involving extreme violence against elderly women, along with theft or robbery of their property. The prisoner had shown himself to be extremely dangerous, a view echoed by the psychiatrists who testified at his trial. The judge said, "I have no choice but to impose the maximum sentence, which means the prisoner will spend the rest of his life in prison. The minimum term that must be served before parole is not appropriate in this case. Given these life sentences, the prisoner will not be released under any order of this court. He will never be released." On September 10, 2005, the 72-year-old serial killer was confirmed to have hanged himself.